Hey, welcome to the Cozy Tea Place. My name is Shannon, and we are here to read chapters 7, 8, and 9 in Volume 1 of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. It's a beautiful rainy day here, perfect for reading, especially Jane Austen. So I will read through the chapter. We will discuss as we go, and then maybe a little discussion afterwards, as well as questions to kind of prompt community and discussion in the comments if you want to join. If you want more of a preface for what we're doing here or on Sense and Sensibility, the book itself, please go back to the very first episode. There's a little bit of like a mini literary history lesson in there, as well as like some literary technique explanations in there. I'm not an expert by any. I hope I'm not messing with this microphone. We'll check. I guess we'll see. I'll try to talk with this hand. I'm not an expert by any means, but I do my research. I'm a lover of Jane Austen. I'm here for the fun and the community and the enjoyment, and not so much the expertise, if you will. We unlock a lot of new characters in this chunk of chapters, and it's very exciting. I'm personally very excited, so get your cup of tea. Mine is right back here for easy access, and let's get going. Chapter 7. Barton Park was about a half a mile from the cottage. The ladies had passed near it in their way along the valley, but it was screened from their view at home by the projection of a hill. Screened from their view just means blocked. It's blocked from their view. The house was large and handsome, and this is Sir John Middleton's house, the main house of Barton Park that they're referring to here. And the Middletons lived in a style of equal hospitality and elegance. The former was for Sir John's gratification, and the latter for that of his lady. So for Sir John, hospitality is the number one priority in their home, and for Lady Middleton, the number one priority is the elegance of their home. They were scarcely ever without some friends staying with them in the house, and they kept more company of every kind than any other family in the neighborhood. It was necessary to the happiness of both. For however dissimilar in temper and outward behavior, they strongly resembled each other in that total want of talent and taste which confined their employments, unconnected with such as society produced, within a very narrow compass. Sir John was a sportsman, Lady Middleton a mother. He hunted and shot, and she humored her children, and these were their only resources. Lady Middleton had the advantage of being able to spoil her children all the year round, while Sir John's independent employments were in existence only half the time, so he could only hunt half the year. Continual engagements at home and abroad, however, supplied all the deficiencies of nature and education, supported the good spirits of Sir John, and gave exercise to the good breeding of his wife. I feel like this paragraph is a lot to take in. These are two very different people, but they both really enjoy, it sounds like, variety. She's occupied by the children full-time year-round. He's occupied by hunting half the year. Gave exercise to the good breeding of his wife. I mean, it makes it, I'm just processing the paragraph. The good breeding of his wife, like keeping her up to date with society? Is that what it means? Like keeping her up with the times? I'm not 100% sure. If you have a better idea or if I'm overthinking it, let me know in the comments down below. Lady Middleton piqued herself upon the elegance of her table and of all her domestic arrangements, and from this kind of vanity was her greatest enjoyment in any of their parties. She loves her place to look good. But Sir John's satisfaction in society was much more real. He delighted in collecting about him more young people than his house would hold, and the noisier they were, the better he was pleased. He was a blessing to all the juvenile part of the neighborhood, for in summer he was forever forming parties to eat cold ham and chicken out of doors, and in winter his private balls were numerous enough for any young lady who was not suffering under the insatiable appetite of 15. So this is saying like teen girls are in need of constant entertainment, and we see this a lot with Marianne, and I have comments about that later. But it's just like Sir John finds such delight in young people. He's like, oh my god, they need to meet each other, I need to meet them, I need to see, who's connecting, I want to know what's going on, and he just loves it, and the neighborhood loves him for it sounds like. The arrival of a new family in the country was always a matter of joy to him, and in every point of view he was charmed with the inhabitants he had now procured for his cottage at Barton. The Miss Dashwoods were young, pretty, and unaffected. Unaffected also means genuine. It was enough to secure his good opinion, for to be unaffected was all that a pretty girl could want to make her mind as captivating as her person. The friendliness of his disposition made him happy in accommodating those whose situation might be considered in comparison with the past as unfortunate. In showing kindness to his cousins, therefore, he had the real satisfaction of a good heart. And in settling a family of females only in his cottage, he had all the satisfaction of a sportsman. This is referring to his hunting. For a sportsman, though he esteems only those of his sex who are sportsmen likewise, so he only sees men as fellow sportsmen, is not often desirous of encouraging their taste by admitting them to a residence within his own manor. He doesn't want any competition for hunting, so he's like thrilled just be housing women. I do sense a little sarcasm. It doesn't feel sarcastic in the narrative per se, but when I kind of take myself out of the story and I think of this line, for to be unaffected or genuine was all that a pretty girl could want to make her mind as captivating as her person. I don't know. I think that there might be some truth to that from Jane because it's not really put in a sarcastic tone. I think this is clearly coming from Sir John Middleton's perspective, but it doesn't sound like she's put too many of those layers that we've talked about on top of it to add to the perspective or the tone of what's being said here. I'm wondering if we can assume or presume that maybe Jane agrees that being genuine is a real factor in being likable or being seen as captivating. Okay, moving on. Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters were met at the door of the house by Sir John, who welcomed them to Barton Park with unaffected sincerity, and as he attended them to the drawing room, repeated to the young ladies the concern which the same subject had drawn from him the day before, at being unable to get any smart young men to meet them. They would see, he said, only one gentleman there by himself, besides himself, a particular friend who was staying at the park, but who was neither very young nor very gay, or merry, or cheerful. He hoped they would all excuse the smallness of the party and could assure them it should never happen so again. He had been to several families that morning in hopes of procuring some addition to their number, but it was moonlight and everybody was full of engagements. So he really wants these ladies to be happy in their new home that he's providing. And he's like, oh my gosh, I have to get some young men to this party because that must be what young ladies want. And the first thing he does when they walk in the door is apologize for the small party, the small amount of people, and that there's only one other gentleman and that he's not very cheerful and he's not very young. Luckily, Lady Middleton's mother had arrived at Barton within the last hour, and as she was a very cheerful, agreeable woman, he hoped the young ladies would not find it so very dull as they might imagine. The young ladies, as well as their mother, were perfectly satisfied with having two entire strangers of the party and wished for no more. So this is Sir John is the only one worried about there being not enough entertainment or cheerful people or just new people to meet because he would want a lot of new people to meet, right? The ladies are like, two new people, like we're good. So Mrs. Jennings, Lady Middleton's mother, was a good-humored, merry, fat, elderly woman who talked a great deal, seemed very happy, and rather vulgar. She was full of jokes and laughter, and before dinner was over, had said so many witty things on the subject of lovers and husbands, hoped they had not left their hearts behind them in Sussex, and pretended to see them blush whether they did or did not. I would be I mean, I can just imagine being new to town, going to a new home, meeting new people, and one of the new people takes it upon herself to be, loud and outspoken about my love life, whether it's existent or not existent, and making presumptions. But I would be so uncomfortable. Marianne was vexed at it for her sister's sake, and turned her eyes toward Elinor to see how she bore these attacks, with an earnestness which gave Elinor far more pain than could arise from such a commonplace raillery as Mrs. Jennings. So for Elinor, she's like, whatever, she can do what she wants. I'm used to this from the older women around me, maybe, or she just knows Mrs. Jennings' type. Marianne is so annoyed and so frustrated, but it's funny because Elinor is more frustrated by Marianne showing in like looking at Marianne, like, can you believe this is what's happening? Elinor is more bothered by Marianne's behavior than Mrs. Jennings. So, new character count, we have Mrs. Jennings, Lady Middleton's mother. She's very unlike her daughter, by the way, and vice versa. And we're about to meet the next one. Colonel Brandon, the friend of Sir John, seemed no more adapted by resemblance of manner to be his friend than Lady Middleton was to be his wife, or Mrs. Jennings to be Lady Middleton's mother. So he's very unlike Sir John. He was silent and grave. His appearance, however, was not unpleasing, in spite of his being, in the opinion of Marianne and Margaret, an absolute old bachelor, for he was on the wrong side of 35, or 35. But though his face was not handsome, his countenance was sensible, and his address was particularly gentlemanlike. There was nothing in any of the party which could recommend them as companions to the Dashwoods, but the cold insipidity of Lady Middleton was so particularly repulsive that in comparison of it the gravity of Colonel Brandon and even the boisterous mirth of Sir John and his mother-in-law was interesting. So insipidity is like blandness, being so bland. They're like, Lady Middleton is so boring, and we would normally have nothing in common with anybody else in this party, but because she's so boring, like Colonel Brandon and the weight of his, energy, and Lady Mrs. Jennings, like, boisterousness is interesting. Like, we'll take it. Lady Middleton seemed to be roused to enjoyment only by the entrance of her 4 noisy children after dinner, who pulled her about, tore her clothes, and put an end to every kind of discourse except what related to themselves. In the evening, as Marianne was discovered to be musical, she was invited to play. The instrument was unlocked, every body prepared to be charmed, and Marianne, who sang very well, at their request went through the chief of the songs which Lady Middleton had brought into the family on her marriage, and while perhaps had lain ever since in the same position on the pianoforte, for her ladyship had celebrated that event by giving up music, although by her mother's account she had played extremely well, and by her own was very fond of it. So Marianne's playing the piano. I find this paragraph, I just have to pet the puppy while we're talking, but I find this paragraph, let's break it down. So Lady Middleton, the lady of the house, brought all this music into the family upon her marriage to Sir John, and had probably laid on that piano like unplayed forever since they've been married, because it sounds like Lady Middleton celebrated their marriage by giving up music. And her mother says that she played extremely well. But what's throwing me off is the part at the end that says, and by her own was very fond of it. Because as we know with these POV swaps, I can't tell that, and by her own, the her that we're referring to, I would imagine we're referring to Lady Middleton. Because it feels distinct from just before where we're saying, although by her mother's account. And by her own account, Lady Middleton's account, she was very, it sounds like she liked it, but she gave it up when they got married. Does she like it or not? Marianne's performance was highly applauded. Sir John was loud in his admiration at the end of every song, and as loud in his conversation with the others while every song lasted. So he's talking through the whole thing, even though he loves it, or says he loves it. Lady Middleton frequently called, "Is this why she stopped playing?" I need answers. Lady Middleton frequently called him to order, wondered how anyone's attention could be diverted from music for a moment, and asked Marianne to sing a particular song which Marianne had just finished. Wait, is this sad? I know I'm taking a lot of time on these very seemingly small things, but I am invested in all of these characters. So Sir John is so loud about how amazing he thinks Marianne's playing is, but he's also so loud during the performance that Lady Middleton has to rein him in and be like, shh, shh, stop talking. And Lady Middleton, is like, I don't understand how anybody could be so immersed in conversation while there's beautiful music playing. And she asks Marianne to play a song again because she kind of missed it because her husband is being so loud. Is this why she doesn't play anymore? Am I being too invested in these side characters? I don't know, but this is really interesting to me. Okay. Colonel Brandon alone, of all the party, heard her without being in raptures. He paid her only the compliment of attention, and she felt a respect for him, this is Marianne, felt a respect for him on the occasion, which the others had reasonably forfeited by their shameless want of taste. So when we're referring to taste here, which we have a couple times in this chapter, it must be like socializing and being seen, and how you're interacting with others, like taste, like being, I would feel like I would compare it today to, like, I'll have to look up taste, but their shameless want of wanting to be involved and wanting to be aware of what's going on around them. Buddy, it's okay. He is the only one that's able to focus and not get distracted by Sir John, it sounds like. His pleasure in music, Colonel Brandon, though it amounted not to that ecstatic delight which alone could sympathize with her own, Marianne's, was estimable when contrasted against the horrible insensibility of the others, and she was reasonable enough to allow that a man of 35 might well have outlived acuteness of feeling and every exquisite power of enjoyment. She was perfectly disposed to make every allowance for the colonel's advanced state of life which humanity required. Oh my god, this is so Marianne really respects that he is, like, respectful of music and invested, or at least paying attention, especially compared to everyone else. And in Marianne's perspective, she's excusing his lack of passion with his age. She's like, well, he's 35 and you can't expect a 35-year-old to have passion or acuteness of feeling or the exquisite power of enjoyment. She's ageist, basically. She's just like, well, he's old, and so I can't expect much, and therefore I also respect him. Okay, so that's chapter 7. Wow, I feel like a lot happened. I feel like I talked a lot through it. Hopefully you followed along with me. Again, I'm still getting used to this. We get a lot of more insight on Sir John Middleton and Lady Middleton and their dynamic here. Did you read between the lines at all about why she stopped playing music and how Sir John reacted to music? Do you think that there is weight to that, to the reasoning that we were kind of talking about before? And how would you react to Mrs. Jennings kind of badgering you and poking at you, or, and then kind of reading your face wrong and just presuming that the blush that you have from embarrassment of her attention and like her poking is a blush of thinking about some sort of suitor? I would not personally do well with that. After this chapter, though, I do know the story. I know the story. I know these characters. I will say that at this point, I do find Colonel Brandon very intriguing. I'm like, why is he so grave? Why is he so silent? Why is he friends with Sir John Middleton, though they are so obviously different? Like, there is a glaring contrast between their personalities right off the bat. What sort of history do they share? I'm wondering as well, these are a few different discussion questions, I suppose, but I'm wondering as well, Sir John Middleton, I'm wondering at his personality, because it sounds like he would be annoying, or it would get annoying, his tendency to be so social, so genuine, so kind. But it doesn't sound like that's how anybody in the situation is reading it. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on him as well. I'm just endlessly fascinated at the end of each of these chapters at the depth of character that Jane Austen gives these people, not just as characters in a novel, but like as people. I'm reading into, you know, like a background of this couple that are very much side characters, and I'm wondering what's going on with their life and what their background is, what made them this way, and what created this dynamic between them. And I'm curious about those things. And I don't always feel that way when I'm reading about side characters in a novel. Often they feel like they're there to move forward the main character's plot or development. And this just feels like a picture of a dinner party with real people and all of their real dynamics happening in real time. And it's just a delight. I'm wondering if every chapter I read will end with me just raving about Jane Austen in general. We're going to move on to chapter 8 after that doozy. So Mrs. Jennings, this is again Lady Middleton's mother, the boisterous woman who is kind of putting the ladies on the spot. Mrs. Jennings was a widow with an ample jointure, so money. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she had now therefore nothing to do but marry all the rest of the world. In the promotion of this object she was zealously active, or just very active, as far as her ability reached, and missed no opportunity of projecting weddings among all the young people of her acquaintance. She was remarkably quick in the discovery of attachments, and had enjoyed the advantage of raising the blushes and the vanity of many a young lady by insinuations of her power over such a young man. So she gets a sick delight out of doing what she did to the girls at dinner the other night. And this kind of discernment enabled her soon after her arrival at Barton decisively to pronounce that Colonel Brandon was very much in love with Marianne Dashwood. She rather suspected it to be so on the very first evening of their being together, from his listening so attentively while she sang to them. And when the visit was returned by the Middletons dining at the cottage, the fact was ascertained by his listening to her again. It must be so. She was perfectly convinced of it. It would be an excellent match, for he was rich and she was handsome. Mrs. Jennings had been so anxious to see Colonel Brandon well married ever since her connection with Sir John first brought him to her knowledge, and she was always anxious to get a good husband for every pretty girl. The immediate advantage to herself was by no means inconsiderable, for it supplied her with endless jokes against them both. So she's getting something out of this right away. She doesn't need them to get married. Like, we're not even at that point yet. She's just immediately getting something out of it by being able to joke with them and tease both of them. At the park, she laughed at the Colonel, and in the cottage at Marianne. So wherever she goes, she's got something to play with here. To the former, her raillery was probably, as far as it regarded only himself, perfectly indifferent, but to the latter it was at first incomprehensible. So Brandon doesn't care, and Marianne is like, What the frick? And when its object was understood, she hardly knew whether most to laugh at its absurdity or censure its impertinence or rudeness. This is Marianne. For she considered it as an unfeeling reflection on the colonel's advanced years and on his forlorn condition as an old bachelor. This is hilarious. Marianne is so not caught up on his age. She's just like, he's old. What are you even talking about? He is old. Like, why are we in this holding the same brain space in your brain together? And with this paragraph and so much talk about age, I did look up how old Jane Austen was when she wrote this novel. She would have been 20 years old when she wrote the first draft, known as Elinor and Marianne, and she would have been around 35 when it was published. So just, between 20 and 35, this novel was developed, written, and published. Because I was just curious, what Jane thought of age. And I think she is, again, not making fun of Marianne, but just painting a picture of how naive Marianne is about everything, and how, like, selfish and I don't mean selfish in, like, the like, in the incredibly negative way, but just selfish, like, one lens. Like, Marianne only sees the world one way right now. And I think that Jane is using Colonel Brandon's age as another way to portray that to us. Mrs. Dashwood, who could not think a man 5 years younger than herself so exceedingly ancient as he appeared to be the youthful fancy of her daughter, ventured to clear Mrs. Jennings from the probability of wishing to throw ridicule on his age. So Mrs. Dashwood is only 40, which is crazy to think about. Makes sense for the time, but still crazy to think about. But at least, Mamma, you cannot deny the absurdity of the accusation, though you may not think it intentionally ill-natured. Colonel Brandon is certainly younger than Mrs. Jennings, but he is old enough to be my father, and if he were ever animated enough to be in love, must have long outlived every sensation of the kind. It is too ridiculous. When is a man to be safe from such wit if age and infirmity will not protect him? This is Marianne being wild. Marianne is wilding right now. So infirmity is frailty. So the last sentence, she's talking about his age and frailty. If that doesn't protect him from the wild emotions and these big emotions of love, then what else is going to protect him, if not the fact that he's old? She's like, feeling everything that I feel is too much for him to feel because he is old and frail. Infirmity, said Elinor. Do you call Colonel Brandon infirm? I can easily suppose that his age may appear much greater to you than to my mother, but you can hardly deceive yourself as to his having the use of his limbs. Marianne says, did you not hear him complain of the rheumatism? And is not that the commonest infirmity of declining age? My dearest child, said her mother, laughing, at this rate you must be in continual terror of my decay, and it must seem to you as a miracle that my life has been extended to the advanced age of 40. Mamma, you are not doing me justice. I know very well that Colonel Brandon is not old enough to make his friends yet apprehensive of losing him in the course of nature. He may live 20 years longer, but 35 has nothing to do with matrimony. Perhaps, said Elinor, 35 and 17 had better not have anything to do with matrimony together. But if there should by any chance happen to be a woman who is single at 27, I should not think Colonel Brandon's being 35 and any objection to his marrying her. A woman of 27, said Marianne, after pausing a moment, can never hope to feel or inspire affection again, and if her home be uncomfortable or her fortune small, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit to the offices of a nurse for the sake of the provision and security of a wife. Marianne's like, a woman of that age can't feel all of those things, and if she is uncomfortable or does not have fortune, then she might as well become a nurse so that she can be secure. In his marrying such a woman, therefore, there would be nothing unsuitable. It would be a compact of convenience, and the world would be satisfied. In my eyes, it would be no marriage at all, but that would be nothing. To me, it would seem only a commercial exchange in which each wished to be benefited at the expense of the other. Oh, Marianne, God, she's like, okay, so if a 27-year-old wanted to marry Brandon, a 35-year-old, that's fine. She's just like, they wouldn't love each other. It would be a marriage of convenience, so they each benefited from what marriage brings. It would be impossible, I know, replied Elinor, to convince you that a woman of 27 could feel for a man of 35 anything near to love, to make him a desirable companion to her. But I must object to your dooming Colonel Brandon and his wife to the constant confinement of a sick chamber, merely because he chanced to complain yesterday, a very cold, damp day, of a slight rheumatic feeling in one of his shoulders. Wait, I'm sorry. Let's go back. That paragraph where Marianne said, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit to the offices of a nurse for the sake of the provision and security of a wife. Is she saying that that the 27-year-old should go to like a nurse to go to like find an old man to marry at a nurse's place to for the benefit of marrying? Either way, she's out of line. But he talked of flannel waistcoats, said Marianne, and with me a flannel waistcoat is invariably connected with aches, cramps, rheumatisms, and every species of ailment that can afflict the old and the feeble. Elinor says, had he been only in a violent fever, you would not have despised him half so much. Confess, Marianne, is not there something interesting to you in the flushed cheek, hollow eye, and quick pulse of a fever? It's so funny. Soon after this, upon Elinor's leaving the room, Mamma, said Marianne, I have an alarm on the subject of illness, which I cannot conceal from you. I am sure Edward Ferrars is not well. We have now been here almost a fortnight, and yet he does not come. Nothing but real indisposition could occasion this extraordinary delay. What else can detain him at Norland? So, like chapters before, when Marianne is surprised that Elinor was, so easily pleased by a statement or not offended by a statement, it seems here that Marianne is really not offended by Elinor's very sarcastic and frank statement of wondering whether or not the drama of sickness and illness does not appeal to Marianne. Like, that's hilarious. And it doesn't seem like she's bothered at all. Because now Elinor leaves the room, and Marianne is like, where the heck is Edward? And why hasn't he come to visit me, us, Elinor? Had you any idea of his coming so soon? Said Mrs. Dashwood. I had none. On the contrary, if I had felt any anxiety at all on the subject, interesting to see here that Mom is a little bit more reasonable on this subject. She's like, it hasn't been that long. Do you think Elinor has any reason to expect him so soon? Marianne says, I have never mentioned it to her, but of course she must. I rather think you are mistaken, for when I was talking to her yesterday of getting a new grate for the spare bedchamber, she observed that there was no immediate hurry for it, as it was not likely that the room would be wanted for some time. How strange this is! What can be the meaning of it? But the whole of their behaviour to each other has been unaccountable. How cold, how composed were their last adieus! How languid their conversation the last evening of their being together! In Edward's farewell there was no distinction between Elinor and me. It was the good wishes of an affectionate brother to both. Twice did I leave them purposely together in the course of the last morning, and each time did he most unaccountably follow me out of the room. And Elinor, in quitting Norland and Edward, cried not as I did. Even now her self-command is invariable. When is she dejected or melancholy? When does she try to avoid society, or appear restless and dissatisfied in it? I do love this. Marianne is very observant of Elinor, even though she may not fully understand Elinor. She's like, why is Elinor not upset and crying and staying in her room and not freaking out that Edward has not visited us or has not given her any reassurance of his feelings? And I love that she was kind of playing matchmaker herself at back at Norland Park. She's like, that last day, I left them together by themselves, hoping that something would happen, but nothing did. And I also have a note here and a question. Do you think that Marianne would thrive in modern times with social media, or do you think it would be her detriment? Because I think in a lot of ways, Marianne or teenage girls are so much ahead of their time. They are so intuitive, they are so observant, so aware of what is going on around them and the dynamics and who's feeling what and what little facial expression that person made towards this person. What does that mean? I'm going to make up a story, or I'm going to intuitively figure out what that is going on there. Do you know what I mean? Like, teenage girls are on it. They know what's going on. And I think that she would have thrived with social media. I think she's incredibly bored. It's similar to what John Middleton was talking about in the last chapter, or what we were getting from his perspective, at least, that like teenage girls, young people really want to be entertained. They really want to meet new people, do new things, see what's going on, be in the know. They're curious. They want to know what's going on everywhere and anywhere, and with who and with what. And I think that that is what we're seeing with Marianne. And it's very familiar to me. I remember feeling that way, and I think I still sometimes do. But I don't think she perceives it as boredom. I think that that's how I'm perceiving it, with like a modern lens, knowing all of the things we have access to for entertainment now. But not only do I think that there's an aspect of boredom here with how much attention she's paying to this or that, or how much passion she puts into things, or maybe like a lack of stimulation, if you will. But that's just the way things were then. But I think also she just has so many lessons to learn. And I am incredibly fascinated by her character so far, because I know where Marianne ends up at the end of the story, and I am so intrigued and excited to see her arc. And I also find it fascinating that quite literally in the text, we are seeing so much of Marianne. She is on the page so often. She's loud, she's opinionated, she's passionate, and the text matches that. We see her a lot. And Elinor, as we know, is a little bit more quiet. Or not a little bit. She's much more reserved and closed off with her feelings, and we see much less of her on the page. We ourselves are closed off to Elinor and how she's feeling. And I just would love to know your thoughts on all of those things. And I'm also curious to see, and this is a spoiler, skip this question if you don't know how this story goes, but I'm also curious to see how Jane Austen brings Marianne and Colonel Brandon together. I don't remember the details of how it happens in the novel, so I'm very curious to see how these characters grow, change, or become aware of certain things in order for them to see each other in a different light. You can come back if you're worried about spoilers. Touching on Colonel Brandon, Mrs. Jennings having the observation that he is in love with Marianne, right? We kind of brush over it a little bit. We figure out, or we learn how Brandon feels about Mrs. Jennings' opinion, and we learn about how Marianne feels about it. Are we supposed to believe that? Are we supposed to believe that he loves her? Or are we supposed to be seeing Mrs. Jennings as full of it because she just finds entertainment in this and she does this everywhere she goes? Let me know what you think of that as well. Okay, chapter 9, let's do it. The Dashwoods were now settled at Barton with tolerable comfort to themselves. The house and the garden, with all the objects surrounding them, were now become familiar, and the ordinary pursuits which had given Norland half its charms were engaged in again with far greater enjoyment than Norland had been able to afford since the loss of their father. Sir John Middleton, who called on them every day for the first 2 weeks, and who was not in the habit of seeing much occupation at home, could not conceal his amazement on finding them always employed. So they're always doing something. Their visitors, except those from Barton Park, the Middletons, were not many. For, in spite of Sir John's urgent entreaties that they would mix more in the neighborhood, and repeated assurances of his carriage being always at their service, the independence of Mrs. Dashwood's spirit overcame the wish of society for her children, and she was resolute in declining to visit any family beyond the distance of a walk. There were but few who could be so classed, and it was not all of them that were attainable. So Mrs. Dashwood really is not interested in putting themselves out there as a family. I don't know. It sounds like this is maybe her natural way, but it's also interesting to look at it from the perspective of they're still recovering, they're still healing, they're still building their home and their life together and their life now after a huge monumental change. About 1.5 miles from the cottage, along the narrow winding valley of Allenham, which issued from that of Barton, as formerly described, the girls had, in one of their earliest walks, discovered an ancient respectable-looking mansion, which, by reminding them a little of Norland, interested their imagination and made them wish to be better acquainted with it. But they learned on inquiry, however you want to pronounce it, that its possessor, an elderly lady of very good character, was unfortunately too infirm to mix with the world, and never stirred from home. So there is an elderly lady who is infirm, is frail and unwell and elderly, unlike Brandon, and she doesn't really mix with society because of those things, and therefore the ladies can't really visit. But the home on the hill in Allenham reminds them very much of Norland, their old home, and that's why they were interested. And that's going to circle back around, so keep that home in mind and that elderly lady in mind. The whole country about them abounded in beautiful walks. The high downs which invited them from almost every window of the cottage to seek the exquisite enjoyment of air on their summits were a happy alternative when the dirt of the valleys beneath shut up their superior beauties. And towards one of these hills did Marianne and Margaret one memorable morning direct their steps, attracted by the partial sunshine of a showery sky, and unable longer to bear the confinement which settled rain of the 2 preceding days had occasioned. So they've been holed up in the house for 2 days because of rain, and they're just like, heck with it. We're going to go for a walk. The weather was not tempting enough to draw the two others from their pencil and their book, in spite of Marianne's declaration that the day would be lastingly fair, and that every threatening cloud would be drawn off from their hills, and the two girls set off together. Marianne's like, the weather's going to hold up, it's fine. And I do love with this little description of the weather was not tempting enough to draw the two others from their pencil and their book. I like that we know who is who. From their pencil, that's very likely Elinor. She's probably drawing, and their book is Mrs. Dashwood. So the two girls set off together. They gaily ascended the downs, rejoicing in their own penetration at every glimpse of blue sky, and when they caught in their faces the animating gales of a high southwesterly wind, they pitied the fears which had prevented their mother and Elinor from sharing such a delightful sensation. Is there a felicity in the world, said Marianne, superior to this? Margaret, we will walk here at least 2 hours. Margaret agreed, and they pursued their way against the wind, resisting it with laughing delight for about 20 minutes longer, when suddenly the clouds united over their heads, and a driving rain set full in their face. Chagrined and surprised, they were obliged, though unwillingly, to turn back, for no shelter was nearer than their own house. One consolation, however, remained for them, to which the exigence of the moment gave more than usual propriety, the crisis or the urgency of the moment. It was that of running with all possible speed down the steep side of the hill which led immediately to their garden gate. So they're super annoyed that they have to go home. They're really sad about the weather, but a consolation prize is that they get to run as fast as they want down the hill towards home. They set off. Marianne had the first advantage, but a false step brought her suddenly to the ground, and Margaret, unable to stop herself to assist her, was involuntarily hurried along and reached the bottom safely. Now, I just want to preface this next paragraph. It is so cinematic. It reminds me of the first paragraph in one of the earlier chapters. I think it was 5 maybe, or maybe it was 6, where Mrs. Dashwood breaks the news that they're going to be leaving Norland and moving to Barton Park. That paragraph barely had any dialogue, but it was so visual. I could see everything. I could see how people were reacting, and this kind of gives that. And it made me think of the scene in the 1995 film adaptation where this takes place. That scene is word for word, step for step what happens here. And I just think, I would imagine for Emma Thompson as the screenwriter, taking this novel and translating it to film must have been so fun, because you'll see what I mean. A gentleman carrying a gun with 2 pointers or dogs playing round him was passing up the hill and within a few yards of Marianne when her accident happened. He put down his gun and ran to her assistance. She had raised herself from the ground, but her foot had been twisted in the fall, and she was scarcely able to stand. The gentleman offered his services, and perceiving that her modesty declined what her situation rendered necessary, took her up in his arms without farther delay, and carried her down the hill. Then, passing through the garden, the gate of which had been left open by Margaret, he bore her directly into the house, whither Margaret had just arrived, and quitted not his hold till he had seated her in a chair in the parlour. Elinor and her mother rose up in amazement at their entrance, and while the eyes of both were fixed on him with an evident wonder and a secret admiration which equally sprung from his appearance, he apologized for his intrusion by relating its cause in a manner so frank and so graceful that his person, which was uncommonly handsome, received additional charms from his voice and expression. Had he been even old, ugly, and vulgar, the gratitude and kindness of Mrs. Dashwood would have been secured by any act of attention to her child, but the influence of youth, beauty, and elegance gave an interest to the action which came home to her feelings. She thanked him again and again, and with the sweetness of address which always attended her, invited him to be seated. But this he declined, as he was dirty and wet. Mrs. Dashwood then begged to know whom she was obliged. His name, he replied, was Willoughby, and his present home was at Allingham, from whence he hoped she would allow him the honor of calling tomorrow to inquire after Miss Dashwood. The honor was readily granted, and then he departed to make himself still more interesting in the midst of a heavy rain. His manly beauty and more than common gracefulness were instantly the theme of general admiration, and the laugh which his gallantry raised against Marianne received particular spirit from his exterior attractions. Marianne herself had seen even less of his person than the rest, for the confusion which crimsoned over her face on his lifting her up had robbed her of the power of regarding him after their entering the house. But she had seen enough of him to join all the admiration of the others, and with an energy which always adorned her praise. Okay, so there's a little more, but let's just pause this sequence. So Willoughby has saved Marianne. He has come into the house like a hero, and his beauty and his elegance and his grace and his manners has made this quite the event. Mrs. Dashwood is like, she would have been grateful even if he was old and ugly and whatever, but he's not. So So this is quite the thing. And he is from Allingham, which is where that house on the hill is that these ladies were very interested in seeing. But I'm not sure that they've connected that that's the specific house yet. I don't know. We'll see. But Marianne, she kind of gets swept up in the, oh my God, he's so handsome and like, oh, how amazing of it all by the energy of everyone else around her. This is how I'm interpreting it because she was so embarrassed by the fact that he picked her up, and because it's immodest, like it's not, you don't touch, you don't, that's not you don't do that. Obviously he saved her and it was necessary, or seemingly necessary, but she was so like blushy and like, oh my God, what's happening right now, that she didn't even look up at him. She didn't even see what was going on. I'm sure she's in pain as well, but she kind of gets swept up in the, oh my God, my hero of it all, because this is Marianne's dream. This is like everything she could ever wish for. Where did I leave off? But she had seen enough of him to join in all the admiration of the others, and with an energy which always adorned her praise. Okay, I did read that. His person and air were equal to what her fancy had ever drawn for the hero of a favorite story, and in his carrying her into the house with so little previous formality, there was a rapidity of thought which particularly recommended the action to her. Every circumstance belonging to him was interesting. His name was good, his residence was in their favorite village, and she soon found out that all of his manly dresses a shooting jacket was the most becoming. Her imagination was busy, her reflections were pleasant, and the pain of a sprained ankle was disregarded. Sir John called on them as soon as the next interval of fair weather that morning allowed him to get out of doors, and Marianne's accident being related to him, he was eagerly asked whether he knew any gentleman of the name of Willoughby at Allingham. And I think it's pronounced Allingham or Allingham, Allenham, Allenham, Allenham. I don't know. Willoughby, cried Sir John. What, is he in the country? That is good news, however. I will ride over tomorrow and ask him for dinner on Thursday. You know him, then, said Mrs. Dashwood. Know him, to be sure I do. Why, he is down here every year. And what sort of young man is he? As good a kind of fellow as ever lived, I assure you. A very decent shot, and there is not a bolder rider in England. And is that all you can say for him? Cried Marianne indignantly. But what are his manners on the more intimate acquaintance? What his pursuits, his talents, and genius? Sir John was rather puzzled. Upon my soul, said he, I do not know much about him as to all that, but he is a pleasant, good-humoured fellow, and has got the nicest little black bitch of a pointer I ever saw. Was she out with him today? I cracked up when I was reading this because this line is in the movie about the dog, but I don't think in the movie it's about Willoughby's dog. It could be. I don't remember. I just know that line's in there, and I just know Emma Thompson was reading this while doing the screenplay, the script, and she was like, we're going to keep that in there. But Marianne could no more satisfy him as the color of Mr. Willoughby's pointer than he could describe to her the shades of his mind. But who is he? Said Elinor. Where does he come from? Has he a house at Allingham? Allenham. Why do I keep saying it like that? Allenham. On this point Sir John could give more certain intelligence, and he told them that Mr. Willoughby had no property of his own in the country, that he resided there only while he was visiting the old lady at Allenham Court, to whom he was related, and whose possessions he was to inherit, adding, yes, yes, he is very well worth catching, I can tell you, Miss Dashwood. He has a pretty little estate of his own in Somersetshire, besides, and if I were you, I would not give him up to my younger sister, in spite of all these tumbling down hills. Miss Marianne must not expect to have all the men to herself. Brandon will be jealous if she does not take care. So, just because Elinor asked a question about where Willoughby is from, Sir John is like, you want him? You should have him. Don't let your little sister have him. You should have him. But he does give us information that Willoughby does reside, or is residing, as a guest at that big old house on the hill that the girlies were really intrigued by, where that elderly lady lives, and he is going to inherit it. He's going to inherit that house. I do not believe, said Mrs. Dashwood with a good-humoured smile, that Mr. Willoughby will be incommoded by the attempts of either of my daughters towards what you call catching him. It is not an employment to which they have been brought up. Men are very safe with us, let them be ever so rich. I am glad to find, however, from what you say, that he is a respectable young man, and one whose acquaintance will not be ineligible. So Mrs. Dashwood very quickly puts him in his place. She's like, I did not raise my girls to chase after men, whether they're rich or not. He is as good a sort of fellow, I believe, as ever lived, repeated Sir John. I remember last Christmas, at a little hop at the park, he danced from 8 o'clock till 4 without once sitting down. Did he indeed? Cried Marianne with sparkling eyes. And with elegance, with spirit? Yes, and he was up again at 8 to ride to Covert. That is what I like. That is what a young man ought to be. Whatever be his pursuits, his eagerness in them should know no moderation and leave him no sense of fatigue. I see how it will be, said Sir John. I see how it will be. You will be setting your cap at him now and never think of poor Brandon. That is an expression, Sir John, said Marianne warmly, which I particularly dislike. I abhor every commonplace phrase by which wit is intended, and setting one's cap at a man or making a conquest are the most odious of all. Their tendency is gross and illiberal or narrow-minded. And if their construction could ever be deemed clever, time has long ago destroyed all its ingenuity. Sir John did not much understand this reproof, but he laughed as heartily as if he did, and then replied, Ah, you will make conquests enough, I dare say, one way or another. One way or other. Poor Brandon, he is quite smitten already, and he is very well worth setting your cap at, I can tell you, in spite of all this tumbling about and spraining of ankles. And that's the end of chapter 9. Okay, a little bit to unpack in the last couple things here. Marianne kind of tries to set Sir John right, being like, I don't like how you talk about, ladies like that, setting one's cap and making conquests, etc., etc. And Sir John, like, does not understand what she says. He does not understand how she said it, why she said it, what's being said. And he then proceeds to use those two same phrases in his response to her because he thought she was making a joke that he didn't get. Like, it's just really funny. So something to note as well, and the last thing that Sir John said, is Brandon really smitten with Marianne? Like, are we just supposed to believe them? Like, are we taking everyone's word for it? And when will we get Brandon's perspective? When will we see that he does really have feelings for her? Because right now, all we know is that he paid attention while she was playing the piano and that he was able to, despite all of the conversation going on around him. But that seemed very much of his character, that he was silent and grave. Why would he be having conversation while there's music happening? I can understand somebody having that personality, at least for the night, being able to focus more on the music rather than the conversation, but it's being perceived or explained to us that that's because he was like enraptured with Marianne. And maybe that's the case. It's just it hasn't been told to us in that way by anyone other than Sir John or Mrs. Jennings, who are known to play matchmaker or put people together or create these stories or at the very least be so social. So I just can't figure out if what they're saying is true, and I wonder at what point I'll believe it as we're reading. Do I need Brandon's perspective? I'm thinking yes, but let me know what you think about that. And the other thing along the same line, similar note, is Sir John is Sir John reliable? I think that he would recognize like a really bad egg. So when he is talking about Willoughby and the girls are asking where is he from, what's he like, what is he interested in, he's like, oh, he's a great guy, he has great dogs and he can ride a horse and he's a really good hunter. And the ladies are like, okay, but like what, tell me more, what's he like? And he's like, he's a great guy and he's a great hunter and he has horses and dogs. Sir John loves people so much, but it almost feels like at a surface level. And how does he measure character? How do we know that he is reliable when he says that someone is a great person or a good guy when he seems to love everyone? And then, of course, Marianne hears that he danced all night and then still had energy to go ride wherever he needed to go the next morning. And she's like, oh my God, that's how a man should be, because she's seemingly apparently so preoccupied with age. She's like, oh, he's young and he has energy and whatever. That it's so, I just can't. I'm so interested to see how these perspectives, especially Marianne's, will develop. I am so interested to see how that will happen. And again, we are still hearing so little from Elinor here. She is just like kind of a quiet sentinel in the back, making sure that everything is still running smoothly. Although it does sound like Mrs. Dashwood has more of a grasp on, the home running and everything. And I just can't help but feel that Elinor must be silently grieving in the back. And Marianne brought up, I think it was in the last chapter, that Edward hasn't visited. We haven't heard anything about Edward from Elinor. We don't know if she misses him. We can assume, of course, but we have not heard anything. We have not heard anything from Elinor, and I'm really, really interested in when that's going to explode. like when is Elinor going to burst? And I do have an idea of when that happens because again, I know the story, but how long is she this quiet guardian of the family without acknowledging her own feelings? How long are we not given access to her? Do you know what I mean? Okay, this little guy's getting so restless. I am going to go. Let me know what you thought of chapters 7, 8, and 9. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm having an absolute blast. So let me know what you think of the story. Any answers to the questions, I would love to discuss with you in the comments down below. And I will see you next time. Bye.